Okay, here we go. I'm so sorry, everybody. I'm such a mess today. Hi, hi. Here's me. Oh, here's not me. All right, here's me. And that. All right, I think we're good to go. We're gonna get started here. Hey, Night Dark. Good to see ya. All right, so we're gonna get right into this. I'll do the intro really quick. It's all the red cards and black cards today, and this is the rest of the commons and uncommons. I'll get this all up on YouTube hopefully tonight, if not tomorrow morning. This is the only content that I make specifically for YouTube, so I don't really advertise that I'm doing it, and um, I'm really sorry that I'm so late. I really am. I thought I'd be ready an hour earlier. The day got away from me a little bit. Uh, okay, so this is the full set review for Murders of Karlov Manor for the purposes of draft. This is meant to help you pick your cards, and you can check out the earlier videos for all of the multicolored cards, the colorless cards, the green cards, the white cards, the blue cards, the set overview, just the general shape of the format, and anything else you need. I will do the rares and mythics this weekend or next week, and then this Friday on a new website, we will have all of the draft ratings and a primer on how you can play. So if you want to get better at drafting this set, if you want to leg up on everybody else who did your pre-release, go ahead and give that a try. Gonna be a good one. I'm very excited for this set. So we used a scuffle review system. It's a little bit like some other systems that you've seen, but I gave everything a score on a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 is a card you should never play. A 2 is a card you should do your best not to play. A 3 is a card that is replaceable. You'll have some, don't worry about it. A 4 is a strong card. Usually it'll be good in an archetype or somewhere specific. A 5 is a card you will always play in a given deck that is in that archetype. A 6 is a card you will always play in a given color, something very powerful. A 7 is a reason to play a deck. Like that card on its own is a good reason to move into that deck. If you see it late, it's a strong signal. A lot of 6s or a lot of 5s can also feel like a 7, and you might need to pivot. An 8 is a card you should work to play, often something evil splash, something very powerful. That's where we'll find a lot of rares. A 9 is a reason to be this color. So you open a card and you open like an Akazat's, pick 3, you're now a black deck. Congratulations. A 10 is a card you always play no matter what. And these numbers are meant to assist you in drafting your cards or deciding what should make it into your deck. I also give everything a floor value, that's the worst a card will be, a ceiling value, that's the best the card will be, and then an amount of effort that it takes you to bridge that gap between the floor and the ceiling. So your goal as a player in using these ratings is always going to be to get to that ceiling. So the number might be pretty accurate, pack one, pick one, but if you're experienced or if you're trying to get a certain deck and it could get to a 10, you might want to take it and force it up to a 10 by taking specific cards. Or if that's what you're missing, it might be closer to a 10. So you can make bad cards into 10s in the right situations or with the right effort. So we're going to get right into this. For red, let's start with red. All right, Night Dark. All right, so I'm also going to do an overview of what you're looking to do in each color pair. So every color pair has a signpost uncommon. So red, green, their signpost uncommon is Tin Street Gossip. It is Big Disguise. So they have big creatures. You're trying to ramp into them or cheat them out. or just flip up large disguised creatures. The color pair weirdly has the best cheap interaction, so the best 1 and 2 mana removal spells and ways to deal with what your opponent's doing. And they are the worst at generating card advantage traditionally. That means less investigate, less cards that will draw 2 cards, but they do have the ability to suddenly flip up a disguised creature to block something that wasn't there before. Also, you can get card advantage out of just big creatures, just it's a little harder. So while you're playing, ask yourself if you need to ramp into your bigger cards, or do you need to just last until you get to your bigger cards? And that can be the difference between something very aggressive or something a little more controlling. You should also value your pump spells a little bit higher, because size really matters in this archetype. Okay. Then blue-red. Blue-red artifacts. Both of the red-blue artifact signpost uncommons investigate and benefit from investigating. Most of your artifacts are going to come from blue, and red has a lot of very powerful ways to sacrifice the artifacts, so they pair off pretty nicely. You want to focus your removal on your weaknesses. So if you don't care about your opponent blocking you, don't worry so much about the cheaper removal spells, and it can be the difference between a 5 damage expensive removal spell or a 2 damage cheap removal spell. You care about growth, so you want to try and buy time. You need to either accelerate that growth, like Gleaming Gear Jacob is a really example. You need to either find a way to sacrifice your artifacts faster, or to buy enough time to sacrifice them naturally, specifically with clues. So if you're going to be paying 2 mana to sacrifice your artifact and draw a card and grow your creature, then you need to buy the time to do that. And if you're going to be accelerating it out, then you need to find cards that let you sacrifice artifacts on demand. You have more removal options in the red card specifically from this color pair, because a lot of them care about sacrificing artifacts or get a bonus if you sacrifice a clue specifically. So you can pick your removal a little bit later. You don't always want to, but there are good if there's a good option in the pack, you might want to take that earlier and pass the red removal spell. Then red-white aggro, still Battalion is nonsense. There are zero, Wizards claims that red-white Battalion is the archetype. There are 0 red cards, full stop, with Battalion in any rarity in this set. But it's still very fast, and you can kind of build your own 20 damage. So keep an eye on how you are counting to 20, how you are killing them. You have access to some powerful direct damage burn spells, like Shock and Lightning Helix, still very good. You can target a creature or a player with it. But you can also kind of combo. You can combo a little bit by powering up a double strike creature with your white spells. You can use your haste creatures in a timely way, and you can sacrifice artifacts to deal damage. There's a lot of good, weirder ways to deal damage in addition to just attacking. And why? I hate this person. There's this guy drives around on a moped, I guess, but he made the engine louder and it sets off this car alarm every time he drives past. So yeah, you got to build your curve and balance your removal against your creatures. So red tends to have a lot of 1 and 2 mana removal spells. White tends to have that deal damage. So they're situational based on the size of the creature. And the white removal spells tend to start at 3 and up, but they deal a lot more. They deal with more. They hit bigger creatures, but they're still situational. Stuff like exile an attacking creature or exile a creature with power 4 or greater. So you have to balance it. If you're doing red-white and you have a ton of early creatures and a ton of early removal, all cheap stuff, then you need to make sure you're drawing cards in the late game and generating that value. And if you have a ton of late game creatures like Meddling Youths with haste, you might need to deal with more creatures early. So you're building a curve for your creatures and you're building a curve for your non-creatures. And then you need to balance those against each other. And then black-red, suspect aggro. So suspect is one of the new keywords. You suspect the suspected creature has menace and can't block. This is a pretty cool archetype. So you can go all in on suspect, and then you need a little bit less removal. You'll be suspecting your own creatures, and then if you have one of your creatures suspected, in a situation where you have 2 creatures and they have 2 creatures, and you suspect both of your creatures and then suspect one of their creatures, well, your opponent can't block anymore. So you can go all in on suspect, but then you need to balance what your removal is doing and how it's working. Because if you are this is a tough aggro deck to play. It's really pretty cool. Suspect doesn't do much on its own. This Runebrand Juggler says sacrifice a suspected creature, but there's a lot of cards that interact well with suspect. Because if you give a creature +3/+0 and it's suspected, well, it's probably going to trade with 2 creatures because it has menace. It's the same tricks that you would normally pair with menace creatures, but it's a keyword that a lot of things have that can give things menace. So like you might need less expensive removal, because if your opponent has a 5/5 and a 2/2, you can shock one and then suspect the other, and they're not going to be able to block anymore. And you're always going to have to be reevaluating what you are suspecting, which creatures you are suspecting and why, and what you want to happen. All right, up next, so the color overview. Red has the best removal, even if it's bad at killing large creatures. Red has 0 ability to kill anything with more than 5 toughness, at least normally, but it's really good at killing the smaller creatures. So you need to get the bigger removal out of your other cards if you are playing a more controlling deck. And red does have really good aggro options, but there is some good defense options available. It's the worst at investigating, but it's really good at using clues. And you need to balance it, like you need to balance your removal. You need to balance suspect capital S against removal. So like you don't need to suspect everything if some stuff is suspected. You don't need to kill everything if some stuff is suspected, whether it's yours or your opponent's. Like try and track their blockers and their attackers all the time. It's cool. I think they did a good job. There are a lot of weaker cards in red, but that's because red needs the most support from other colors to do the things it's good at. It's aggro by default, but there's plenty of good mid-range and control decks available in red just because of the cheap removal spells. So if you're playing something more controlling, then you'll be using your red spells to stay alive until the other engines pop off. So the questions to ask while you're drafting red are, what do you need to burn? Are you going to be trying to burn your opponent's face down creatures? Are you going to be burning their face directly? How are you dealing damage? And I know that's like you can do it by attacking, but you can also do it by comboing and pumping up a huge double strike trampler, or you can do it by building an engine that is dealing a little bit of damage every turn. Like it's fine to shock your opponent 3 times if you have 3 shocks and enough clues. Where do your artifacts come from and where do they go? Like, are you going to be sacrificing your clues just to draw cards? Are you sacrificing them to things that say sacrifice an artifact? Or are you just using them? Like, are you just using your clues to be in play until you need to draw cards and then keep using your small creatures? What other cards can you pair with each card? Most of the cards you need to, most of the cards that are good in this color need a second card, something specific. Sometimes it's something specific, sometimes it's just something like a removal spell or to suspect it. But there's lots of cool little combos that we're going to keep an eye out. So this is kind of a combo-ish color if you build it right. Hey Kaiser, so I only answer questions between slides. Burn is close to viable. There's not a ton of burn that directly impacts the other player, but there's enough. Like we've got shock, we've got lightning helix, and we've got a few tricky things and a few flyers. So burn is viable if you have the clues for it. Like you'll need to keep drawing cards and shooting them, and you need a lot of powerful red spells. I don't think it's viable by default, but you could certainly get a good burn deck together. And in this set, you are going to want to use your burn spells to close out the game. So like you sort of will pump things and sneak damage through, use evasive threats, and then if you're at 6, you got to be careful because it's very likely your opponent can lightning helix and burn you. All right, on to the cards. How you doing, Kai? Need a drink. All right, up first we have Bullrack Clan Crusher. I gave it a 5 with a floor of a 4 and a ceiling of 6. You have to be a little careful when your 6-drop dies to shock, and that does suck. But this card really rewards growth. So like, you need to put a little work into it, but if you're like a red-green disguise deck, then there's a few good ways to put ++1 counters on creatures. And this one really gets a lot out of just a counter or 2 because it lets it survive specific burn spells. This is also a pretty interesting way. Like, this is a combo card if you want it to be. You can pump it up a bunch while it's still face down and then flip it up. And double strike and trample is a lot. Like, even if your opponent blocks it, you are hitting them. If your opponent blocks with a 2/2, you're still hitting them for 6. This is also very likely to win any combat that it gets flipped up, so it ends up being a solid threat all around. I like this because it's a solid threat all around with that combo potential. So like if your opponent suddenly starts growing their face down disguise creature, they might be trying for a combo kill with the Bulrak Clan Basher. There's a few, it makes a lot of cards that are otherwise pretty weak a lot stronger. But if you put 1/1/1 counter on this and surprise your opponent with 8 damage, suddenly this is really hard to deal with. And if you suspect it, it is very likely to just kill whatever they block with it. Though it's weak to conventional removal, like instants and sorceries, but it's great at winning combats. So it's a solid red card, and the being able to disguise it for 3 or play it for 6 is nice, but you're almost always going to be disguising it and flipping it up and trying to get that big win with it. It is fragile, so you kind of want to move into it over time. You need to make sure that your opponent has already spent their shocks on your other creatures. But if you're building your red deck right, they're going to have to draw a fresh shock because they will have been spending their shocks on other creatures. Case of the Burning Mask. Really solid removal, a good case. 3 mana to deal 3 is just okay, but being able to cycle it, like being able to turn this into Anticipate later is nice, and it's not that difficult. If you have a 1-drop, a 2-drop, and a Case of the Burning Masks on 3, you've already solved this case. You do have to plan a bit on solving it, but being able to shoot something for 3 is nice. I'm going to go ahead and lower this to a 5. Sorcery Speed Deal 3 is not something I'm interested in if I'm not solving it, and I don't think it's good if you aren't solving it pretty early on. But like a 5 is a good score. Like I don't think this is better than Lightning Helix or Shock, which is why I just lowered it. But it is a solid card, and it's good removal. And it's good removal that lets you pivot. Like you can play it in an aggressive deck, or you can play it in a more controlling case deck in red-white. There's some cool things you can do with the Case of the Burning Masks. I just realized this combos with the white case. The white case is each creature you control deals 1 damage to target creature. So like Case of the Burning Mask into the Case of the Train Robbery, that's not what it's called, but Case of the Train Robbery triggers it by itself. But the payoff for solving this case, because it's not a hard case to solve, is a little lighter than the others. It is a 2-for-1. It's a cool card. Yeah. Hey, Christmas, good to see you. Let me know if you have any questions. I answer questions between slides. Okay, up next, Caught Red-Handed. This one I revise a lot. There's no sack outlet that is easy to use. Like if you have 12 mana to Caught Red-Handed a creature and then sack it to a Runebrand Juggler, that's awesome. You are already winning that game. So like you need to get the value out of Caught Red-Handed early. So it is nice. It's not a terrible 5 mana way to win the game because you get to take a creature and it gains menace, but the instant speed isn't terribly helpful because you can't gain control of a creature and block with it. There is not a good way to gain control of a creature at instant speed and then unsuspect it in order to remove that. If you find one, let me know at rare. Generally speaking, this is like the finishing spell, and 5 is a lot for that effect. 5 is just a lot for this effect, but the menace is nice, and I'll cite it in occasionally. I also love the flavor text. Thank you, Christmas. Yeah, this flavor text is so good, and I'm gonna be like, this is the kind of flavor text I'll be quoting for a long time. No, so I just gave it a 3. It's playable. It's playable in your most aggressive decks, but there are better things to be doing at 5 mana. Yeah. Concealed Weapon, love this one. So like a 2 mana equipment that equips for 2 and gives +3/+0 is not great, but this solves the problem that a lot of equipment have, similar to that Korvod's Haunch from yesterday, the white card. In that if you don't have a creature to put this on, just play it face down, and then you can get some pretty cool things going where you can like block with it and then equip it somewhere else by flipping it face up in order to, like, once it's flipped face up, it stops being a creature, so it's removed from combat, and you can flip it face up, put it on something else. It's also great as a trick with suspected cards. So the fact that so many of your creatures have menace make this card a lot better, because if you have a 1/1 with menace and they double block it, well, you get to trade it up for 2/3/1s, and +3/+0 with equip 2 left over is solid. Like that turns any creature you have in the game after this into a threat. This is a very powerful equipment in this set. I'm going to have a lot of fun. I love cards that are creatures and then stop being creatures. Yeah, this is a pretty versatile and neat equipment. You'll find that a lot of the there's a lot of 3, 4s, and 5s on the red cards because of how contextual they are. Like, a lot of them are aggressive decks are cool in this format. Like, you are really going to have to think. It's a puzzle. Like, you are going to have to think about how to deal 20 damage every game and how to pull value out of the fact that your opponent is forced to block. It's very neat. Like, the puzzle of, so like, you're going to have so many situations with like 2 cards that suspect, and you're going to have to figure out how to divvy out those suspects between giving your creatures menace and turning off your opponent's blockers. I love it. All right, up next, Convenient Target. Solid card, like +1/+1 and menace and can't block is not, like, that's almost an aura you'd play. But the reason that's almost an aura you'd play is because early on you'll play it on your own creature for an attacker. Late game you'll play it on your opponent's creature to remove the blocker. But the fact that you can pick it up and recast it means that you get both. You get to play it early game on your attacker and then play it late game. Oh, so I guess this is where they were suspecting Rakdos, and then Agreskos is like, well, Rakdos doesn't look like he just killed someone. Cool. There's also a few neat extra ways to do it. There are cards that are like, discard a card from your hand, do a thing, or discard a card, draw 2 cards, or loot, or rummage. And then this card is a good way to evoke value. So like earlier I said, red is bad at making clues. It is bad at making clues, but Convenient Target is clue adjacent. You can get a clue's worth of value out of this card, and it's 3 mana instead of 2, but it's pretty solid. There are also cards that care about cards leaving your graveyard, although most of them care about creatures leaving your graveyard. So like this as a Precision Skeleton would be awesome. But there's a surprisingly versatile pump spell. There's just good pump spells. Like, this card has competition in both the card advantage, in both the mana sink department of 3 return it, and in the creature modifier department. But since it does both pretty well, I'm usually going to be happy to have this in my deck, just not more than 1. So yeah, that's why I gave it a 4, because too many of these are dangerous, and so much of this set is going to come down to racing that giving your opponent's creature +1/+1, even though it can't block, can be very dangerous. So hard to play with, very cool card. Cornered Crook. This might be my pick for best red uncommon. Nope, it's tied. So it is, you do have to have artifacts to sacrifice, and it's worth the effort of having artifacts to sacrifice. Just a 5 mana 5/4 that deals 3 to anything is very good. It kills a lot of the creatures in the set, and being able to shoot your opponent is very valuable. This is a fast enough set that shooting your opponent for 3 is worth a lot of value. And there are a lot of cards in this set that actively reward you for, in red, that actively reward you for sacrificing artifacts. So you got to be a little careful in that you have to plan to have an artifact. So you will likely have created an artifact sometime before turn 5, but you will also have been tempted to sacrifice that elsewhere. So I don't think it's that difficult to get it up to that ceiling of a 7, but I still kept the effort at medium because you have to be thinking about it. If you have Cornered Crooks in your deck, you have to be thinking about it. I should have noted earlier, caught red-handed, there are not good ways to sacrifice creatures in this set, but there's a lot of good ways to sacrifice artifacts. So if your opponent has artifact creatures, which there's a few good ones at rare, go for it. 6 cards, that's why I gave it a ceiling of a 5. All right, for corner, up next we've got Crime Novelist. This card needs help outside of red, but it's very powerful. If you can sacrifice 1 artifact, you are happy with the Crime Novelist. As the first time I read this card, I thought it cost a red. You can pay red to put a +1/+1 counter, but no, it adds red. So you can play a Crime Novelist on and then crack all your clues. I love this card if you are making a lot of clues, because finding the time to crack all of your clues can be pretty difficult. But you can also use it to generate some mana in niche situations. You do need outside help. You need to find other ways to make clues. You need to include artifacts that you might not have had otherwise. But if you can, you don't necessarily need to grow this to be good. If you have other instants, you can just pass with clue mana up, and then you don't have to crack the clue. Just that threat of activation means that they're not going to be able to throw 3 damage at it. Plus, it's a 3-drop that survives disguise creatures and survives shock, and has the potential to take over the game later on. I like this one, but it does need some help. Yeah, I gave it a 6. The floor is a 4. That's if you only have a few artifacts. You're just so likely to have artifacts. And if you have a bunch, it gets really good really fast. Demand answers. Tormenting voice with upside. Thrill of possibility with upside. We've seen this effect before. I usually give it a 3. I gave it a 4 in this set because sacrificing an artifact means that you're just so much less likely to be stuck with it in your hand in the late game. It's such a disaster to draw a Tormenting Voice off the top of your deck with no other card in hand. But being able to do it at instant speed is really nice. You can sacrifice an artifact that they would target elsewhere, and there are cards that you're happy to discard in this set. Like, you are okay getting cards in your graveyard. So I gave it that floor of a 3, but that ceiling of a 5, that's if you have any of the other things it works with. That's if you're making artifacts, that's if you care about cards in your graveyard. It can be difficult to find the time to cast this in the most aggressive decks, but like, this is a format where you inherently want a few more lands because you are using those lands to crack clues and generate the cards you need, even in your more aggressive decks. So I like having a copy of Demand Answers in order to cycle away my extra lands. Expose the Culprit. What a card. So this card is really pretty cool. You do need disguise creatures. That's why I gave it a high and an effort value of high and a 3. But like, if you're actively picking disguise creatures higher, you can take this card, and then it bumps up the other disguise creatures. So the thing about this card specifically is that the disguise creatures in red generate a lot of value when they are turned face up. So like, hang on, we're going to pull up the multicolored cards really quick. So we're going to take a quick look at some of the red cards that we can blink with it. And they are notably Gadget Technician, and Dogwalker. So Dogwalker makes 2 dogs, Gadget Technician makes a Thopter, and those are just the ones that common. There's a few good ones that are uncommon too, although they're mostly in other colors. You can get a lot of value out of this card. It's just work to do so. So if you are in a situation where you can get 3 cards of value out of this Expose the Culprit, because first you flip a face down creature face up. It could be something really expensive, and then you can exile any number of face down up creatures and scramble them. So there's value in scrambling them. There's value in having the opportunity to flip them up a second time. Like, even if you have nothing else in play, like, it is not terribly unlikely that you block with a face down disguised Dogwalker, and then before damage you flip up the Dogwalker, make 2 1/1s, blink just the Dogwalker, and then on your turn you flip it up again and make 2 more 1/1s. I like this card, but you need to already have a lot of pieces for it to work. So I only gave it a 3 with a pretty high ceiling. If you have high value disguised creatures, it's a great card. There's some really high value rare disguise creatures. There's not a lot of powerful ones lower, but at rare, if you have some, like, there's a blue one that bounces a creature, that one's really good to reset. You want the blue-red creatures that reset, and if you have rares, you can protect them. Expose the Culprit both resets your face-down creatures, or your face-up creatures with disguise, and protects one. It also shakes off auras. It shakes off the aura removal too. So cool card. That's some work to do, and I love it. This card is such a cool trick. It's gonna be so much fun to play with. Next we have Felonious Rage. I came back to this one a few times. So here's my argument on Felonious Rage. Red-white Battalion is very interested in keeping a critical mass of creatures in play. It doesn't really matter what those creatures are. Red-black is very good at suspecting creatures, and both of those archetypes have enough support within red that you're pretty happy with Felonious Rage, and that haste is really going to get some people. So it doesn't reset a creature, but it keeps a body in play, and if that, so many of your creatures have menace, so often you'll have a suspected 1/1, and your opponent will have to put their own 1/1 and a 2/2 in front of it, thinking that they're going to trade. And Felonious Rage really punishes that. You do have to think about which specific cards you're pairing with Felonious Rage. Like, it's not a free thing. But I like this one. It's a good trick. I also have bumped up a lot of tricks in general. So we've seen this effect before. It's usually a 3. I bumped it up to a 4 because of how many specific little combos there are with it. Also, it makes a detective, which is fairly relevant. Up next, we've got Frantic Scapegoat. This card is so funny. So it's not strictly a 1-mana 1/1 with haste, because you can't block with it off the top of your library in the late game. It is specifically for aggro decks. It is best in the suspect decks, and you can... Loading up a suspect is valuable. So, like, it even combos with little things like Runebrand Juggler. So, Runebrand Juggler can suspect itself, but you'll end up with 2 suspected creatures. There's other 2-drops that suspect it. There are cards in black that suspect other creatures. So then you can have them both suspected. But you need to want the suspected cards, and you often don't. It does... If Battalion were a thing, I would be a lot happier with this card, because it's a relatively safe way to trigger it. It's a hard to block way to trigger it. And if you have ways to grow it, or little combos with a Frantic Scapegoat, I'm pretty happy. But it's usually going to play near that floor of a 3, which is just a filler 1-drop in an aggro deck. I do like this card. I think it's pretty cool, but it only works... It's not that it only works in specific decks, it only works with specific cards. You need to have those cards before you start picking up the Scapegoats. Galvanize, solid removal spell. I would be careful with this one, because like 2 mana for 3 is solid, but there's a lot of stuff that does this. But if you can consistently get up to 5 damage, then this card just becomes a lot better. When you can get this up to 5 damage some of the time, that's why it's a 5. But in like the blue-red deck, I'll take Galvanize over Shock pretty often. It's not free to trigger, but you can set up triggers for when you need them. Red also just had a lot of competition for the burn, but this is a powerful removal spell for 2 mana, and being able to take it up is nice. I'm really considering bumping this up to a 6. This might end up at a 6. We'll revisit this. It just kills everything, but removal is kind of weak. I don't think this is as hard as the rating I gave it to bump it to turn on. Because like you plan it. Like if you need to deal 5 damage, you just crack your clue and galvanize that turn. And if you know you have a bunch of galvanize, then you don't crack your clues ahead of time. So yeah, we're gonna bump this up to a 6. I like that. Okay, Gearbane Orangutan, we're giving this a revisit. But I like this card. So like 3 mana, destroy an artifact on a 2/2 with reach is a good card in this format. Like it's really hard to find the time to kill a clue, and you never want to spend a card on a clue. But the thing is, being able to sacrifice an artifact to be a 4/4 with reach is something I'm going to be happy to do fairly often. The ability to change sizes is valuable on this card. And in the late game, when you're cracking clues and spending that mana elsewhere, then getting 4 power for 3 mana on a stabilizing force like the orangutan is something that I'm pretty happy to do. There's also artifacts I'm scared of that I want to be able to kill with that. It does have diminishing returns, so I'm going to go ahead and lower that floor, because like you don't want to fill up on the orangutans. I might be off on this one. I need to look at the rares again. That's why I'm keeping this revisit. But I think this is a good card. It just comes down to how much I can value the reach and the artifact. But I think this is usually going to just be a 2-for-1. Like you will usually kill a clue and trade with a disguised creature, and I'll be very happy with that. Because not as many of the disguised creatures gain toughness. I do like this card. Like I'll be playing it pretty often, but I'm gonna keep it at a 5. It just feels so weird. Like I had Galvanize at a 5, and I do think Gearbane Orangutan is going to be a card you occasionally take over Galvanize in the Artifact Sacrifice deck. Like 4.5 is where I'd put this normally. Like it's between a 4 and a 5, but that doesn't feel right. So we're gonna go with a 5. 5 diminishing returns, I like that. All right. Goblin Maskmaker. I went through a whole bunch of scenarios because I want so badly for this card to be good. But a 1/2 for 1 just doesn't do enough. Like, if you can suspect it, that's cool. And And getting a Deceive creature on turn 2 is really cool, but it's really, you have 2-drops that you want to play on turn 2. It's a lot like Ixali's Lore Keeper out of the last set from LCI, the 1-mana 1/1 that made mana only for dinosaurs, and it felt amazing when you got to play your turn 2 Pugnacious Hammerskull, a 3/6/6. But it's not, playing your 2/2 with Disguise on turn 2 isn't worth it unless you are trying to get a critical mass of disguise things. And there are some rares, I did look at those rares. There are some rares that I think make this card solid. There are rares, if you have rares that care about having all the disguised creatures possible, then it's fine. But like, you are losing a slot for a disguised creature by playing the Mask Maker. I do hope to someday attack with 3 Goblin Mask Makers and cast 20 spells. But I don't think it's going to happen too often. I do think this card has a constructed spot. It's just, you're so often going to have to sacrifice it when you attack with it to play your disguised creatures. So like, even on the play, if I knew I was going to be on the play, I'd be a lot happier with this card. But on the draw, it's so hard to get that attack in. At least more than once. And then if you can find a situation where it's worth sacrificing this creature to get it in, it's worth it. I do think there's a like mono 1-drops deck. I think you can build an aggro deck with all of the 1 and 2 drops. And he has a place there, but that's really difficult to do. So I gave it a ceiling of 4. It would also be better if there were more good tricks. So the white 2/2/2 and investigate trick, I think that card makes this card a lot better, but you need so many things to go right before I'm happy to include this, which means I won't be picking it very high. Harried Dronesmith. So this one has a low floor, high ceiling. If you're only making a Thopter every turn, like, it's a flyer, it's solid, but really you only want this for battalion decks that care about attacking a lot of creatures, and the Artifact Sacrifice deck, where it's great. It's so powerful in the red-blue Artifact Sacrifice deck because it creates an artifact and sacrifices it by itself every turn while pinging. Cool card, but it is a role player in those decks. Innocent Bystander. This card is really difficult to turn on. If you can make it bigger, then it's playable. But most of the cards that make it big, it's just very hard to get this to 4 toughness, and then take 3 damage. So you, at best, this is a 2-mana 2/1 that investigates, which is fine and replaceable. It's a 2-mana 2/1 that investigates is good. A 2-mana 2/1 that investigates some of the time is replaceable. It does trade with other disguised creatures, but then it doesn't investigate. Yeah, it's not something I'm going to be too happy to play with. It doesn't have relevant creature types, but I'll play it as a 2-drop when I need a 2-drop. Knife. This is one of the worst clue equipments, mainly because red does have things to replace it with and does not have the same amount of time that other colors have to sacrifice the knife to draw a card. There are little combos with First Strike. There are a few good combos with First Strike, which is why that ceiling is a 5. We'll go over some of them when we get to black today. But you need those combos before it's even worth investing the equip on the knife. It's also, if you have suspected creatures, it is like the fact that this does absolutely nothing on defense makes me like it a lot less, because like the reason I like the other clue equipments in other colors so much is because they're so good on defense, and then when you are otherwise stable, you can crack them. But this one's so good on offense, and then if you're in a situation where you're trying to dig for those last cards on offense, you're in trouble. And if you have a suspected creature and you can put the knife on it, and it's big, then that creature is going to be really hard to block. But a lot of the suspected creatures are tiny, and like it doesn't do anything on the Frantic Scapegoat. You still just trade with a 2/2. If your opponent double blocks with 2 2/2s, you trade with 1, and the other 2/2 just kills it. So playable but replaceable. Offender at Large, same deal, playable but replaceable. Is not, you can get value out of it. It actually combos pretty nicely with a knife, but there's very few things. This doesn't let you, this doesn't turn something that wasn't a trade into a trade. Like if it gave +2/+2, this card would be great. But because it's +2/+0, unless you're attacking with First Strike, it's a little weak. Red also has a lot of incentives to play its spells pre-combat, which makes it tough to flip this up during combat, and it's not great on defense. It's fine in the disguise deck, in the red-green disguise deck specifically, because you can cheat that mana. The 4/4 that taps for 2 is good with this card. But if you aren't specifically in that red-green disguise deck, it is weak. Yep, it's weak outside of one archetype. Person of interest. 2 bodies for 1 creature is always... 2 bodies on 1 card is always nice. We've seen 4 mana for 2 2/2s be good in a lot of sets. It's close to as good here, but you cannot double block with those creatures. Like, making 2 creatures with a person of interest doesn't stabilize you. But it's great on offense and is great in Suspect deck. It's good to have multiple bodies on 1 card. So I gave it a 4, which is strong and reasonable, but you will replace it with stronger cards when you get to them. Similar, so these have the same score, but very different floors and very different ceilings. 2 mana 0/3 blocks pretty well, and it rummages on attack. It attacks as a 2/3, which I do like, but you have to want to rummage. You have to want to sacrifice cards. So it's good it's solid in red-black. It's really good in blue-red. You'll find that a lot. I'll say this a lot, that this card is really good in blue-red because blue-red just kind of builds itself. But yeah, this card is good when you want to sacrifice artifacts actively. Because it does it for free. It sacrifices artifacts on attack for free. There's also cards you actively want to discard, and then this card is good at enabling that. But if you're not actively enabling something with this, you don't play it. You don't... you can find the cards that work well with Reckless Detectives in this set, like in this color. Within red alone, you can work with Reckless Detective, but you do need those specific cards. Red Herring, this is a pretty cool card. So we see this 2 mana 2/2 haste has to attack a lot, and just so you know, have an idea of how this plays out, if you play this on turn 2, it's great. It's going to attack all the time. If you play this on turn 5, it's a little weaker. Usually it'll have to be forced to block. So you can block with it 1 time by playing it after combat, but your opponent will eventually get to the point where they just have a 2/3 or a 3/3 in play and block it cleanly, and then you're down a card. Well, Red Herring solves this problem by also being a clue. Very cool card. So, like, it's a reasonable attacker. I'm lowering the floor to 3, but I'm keeping that 5 and that 6 ceiling. You're pretty happy with this in any aggressive deck. You just need to be an aggressive deck. Just being able to turn it into a relevant body later is really nice. A 2 mana 2/2 haste is great. It's really good in an aggressive deck. And solving that drawback by being a clue is nice. Exactly. Thank you, Thane. You can play it post-combat to block if you need to block. And this is a good blocker. Like, you can play it post-combat, chump block, and draw a card. And that's not ideal, but it's great if you're racing. Like, it's unassuming, but this card is powerful in any aggressive red deck. You do have to be aggressive. All right, Rebel Belt Bragger. This is one of those cards that I have differing opinions on than other content creators. So, you wouldn't play a 5 mana 5/5 with Menace that can't block, except unless you're in the most aggressive deck. And you wouldn't play a 5/5 vanilla as a blocker. I mean, you would if you needed to. But this is big. This has keyword big going for it. It's pretty tough to deal with. And the bigger creatures do better with Menace because they're hard to chump block, and your opponent is going to have a lot more trouble putting 2 creatures in front of it that kill it. It's also dangerous. If your opponent blocks with a 4/4 and a 2/2 and thinks, oh, I'm going to... then you only need 1 removal spell or 1 pump spell to take out both of those cards. So I like this as a 5-drop. You have diminishing returns inherently because you can only run so many 5-drops in an aggressive deck. But I like this card in an aggressive deck, in a mid-range deck, and I may even splash it occasionally. I'm going to go ahead and raise that ceiling. Because you have control over how it's suspected. So you can get rid of the suspected to pay costs that care about suspected things. But it blocks the turn it comes down. You can play it as a 5 mana 5/5, it blocks for a turn, and then it doesn't become suspected until it starts attacking. And I really like that about this card. I think it's better than it looks. It seems very unassuming, but like a 5 mana 5/5 with Menace is something I'm happy to play in this set, especially with that suspect keyword. I just don't want too many. Shock! It's good. It kills many things. You don't terribly mind paying 2 extra mana to hit a warded disguise creature. You can shoot it at your opponent when you need to. It always does what you need it to do, and especially in this format, when a lot of your mana is spent building engines, generating card advantage, and cracking clues, You want cheap interaction, and this is cheap, relevant interaction. You've heard me say a lot during the set review that you don't want your 4 drops to die to shock. You don't want your 5 drops to die to shock. Well, that only matters because we have shock. And unlike a lot of the 1 mana powerful spells that I keep putting at 6s, I'm okay splashing shock. I won't always, but in a green deck, I'll probably play the shocks I get. You have to be conscious of this card, full stop. Like, it's just good in this format. And you will be pointing it at your opponent's face a lot more often than we have in other formats. Shock is shock. I love the flavor text here. Yep. Like, this card, shock, there's 2 things that affect how good shock is in any given format. The first is, how many things does it kill? Well, when 58 things have disguise, I don't think that's the right number. When a lot of things have disguise, and a lot of things have 2 toughness, is great. It kills a lot of things in this format. And then the more difficult thing to have in a format is card advantage. When you have the ability to consistently turn your mana into fresh cards, this card gets better. 1 mana impactful spells get better. Yeah, I do love this flavor text. Like, this is the flavor text. This feels like flavor text that somebody wrote 20 years ago, and they were just sitting there, fingers steepled, waiting for the right card to put it on, and they're like, perfect. This is the perfect card to put it on. Love shock. Is this Prost? Is this who is that? Or is this just a random girl? We need to find some Prost flavor text. Like, he's gonna crack things wide open. I like the idea that somebody's like, oh shit, mystery in Ravnica. And then we had lots of detectives in Ravnica because there's lots of crimes. But we also had a ton of people who were like, I'm a detective, I'm a detective, I'm a detective. And everybody else was like, well, we gotta treat you like a detective because you said you were a detective. No Prost here. Sorry, I was checking for Prost. I'm trying to learn the characters a little better. All right, Suspicious Detonation. So this is a cool card. It kills 85% of the creatures in this set. So I've been telling you a lot of removal is bad because you aren't going to have time to play it, or a lot of removal doesn't hit what you need to hit. But the thing about Suspicious Detonation is, like, in red, if in most red color combinations, you will have clues that you don't have time to crack. Well, Suspicious Detonation is how you buy the time to crack the clue at the same time that you clear a blocker. You can also set up turns where it's just 2 mana with cards like Reckless Detective. It's some work, and I wouldn't play too many. You don't want this to cost 5 mana ever if you can help it, but you'll also pick it up when you need it. And I do, like, it's no shock, but you can get it down to 2 mana, and you can also have 2 copies of this card, crack a clue and fire off 2 copies of this card. It's solid removal. It is not quite card advantage, but will often feel like card advantage when you have these, when you are playing with it. It's a cool card. The chase is on. I have not, this is a dangerous pump spell. 3 mana is a lot for this kind of effect. And the Investigate is nice. The reason I gave it a 4 is because of Suspect. If you have a suspected creature and your opponent double blocks, well, suddenly this is a 3-for-1 instead of a 2-for-1, even though it's expensive. So not giving toughness is a strike against it because you can't ever use it to save a creature. But in the Suspect deck, this card is fantastic. And in the Investigate deck, this card is fantastic. It's weak elsewhere. I like it though. Like, you will also end up playing this if you don't have enough card advantage or if you don't have enough removal. Like, it fills in on some of the gaps that you'll have. Hey Alex, how's it going? All right, up next we have Torch the Witness. This is tied for my highest pick red card. The difference between this and the Cornered Crook is, like, I'll play a Mountain and Torch the Witness in a control deck. Like, I'll play this in pretty much, if I am red, I will take this card, and if I am green, I will take this card and run it with a Mountain because it will kill a creature and investigate. That Investigate is really valuable. So, like, it deals twice X damage. So this is 2 mana, deal 2 damage to a creature, or 3 mana, deal 4 damage to a creature, or 4 mana, deal 6 damage to a creature. All of that is above rate. All of those are cards you're happy to play. You do really want to get the Investigate out of this, but if you don't, it's not a huge deal. There are also little combos with it. So I almost gave it a ceiling of H just because there is a card that whenever it's dealt damage, deal that much damage to a player. And I just realized, hold up, one sec. I want to pull up. I need to check a thing. I need to make sure that this isn't damage from a source and opponent controls. This Barbed Servitor. Whenever it's dealt damage, target opponent loses that much life. All right, so it does combo. So you have a 2-card combo that one-shots your opponent. Very cool. I want to make it happen. I will be taking that Servitor, trying to make it happen. Like, this card is just so easy to splash that killing a... This is a very easy to splash, kill a creature, investigate. So if you first pick a Torso Witness, it doesn't even lock you into red. I think this card is pretty good. Vengeful Tracker. This is the aggressive 2-drop you want. It's a detective. It punishes your opponent for digging for answers for it. Like... And it turns off an archetype. Your opponent can no longer be blue-red Thopters with a Vengeful Tracker in play. This is the best 2-drop in red. Let me double check that. Airing, Reckless Detective. Yes, this is the full stop best 2-drop in red. And since you need 2-drops for your aggressive deck, take it pretty high if you're an aggressive deck. Very cool. Like, I kind of like this card. So, yes, he's a detective, but he's ignoring the clues. He's just killing. Hey, Skogan, we just finished the red cards. I'm going to go get some water, and we'll move on to black. Be right back. If you have any questions about red, you can go ahead and ask them before I get back. Yeah, we'll leave it here. All right, I'll be right back. You can, Alex, but I probably will not pull it up on stream while this is going. We'll pull up this one. All right, be right back. This is the color overview for black. Black is the last color of the common and uncommon set review. Be right back. The answer, Alex, is that I put in a ton of work for this stream specifically. I don't advertise the set review as much because I too many people makes it difficult, but like I really like the people here now. But yeah, I need some people, but not a million. So but like, yeah, this one takes me, I don't know, it's like a solid 20 hours of prep. Thank you, Skogan. Let me know if you have any questions. All right, so we're moving on to black. Up first, we've got green-black Gravebreak. So the Gravebreak, so Wizards named it this. I kind of like it because it's all about creatures leaving your graveyard. So while you're drafting green-black, first off, I didn't put this, but be prepared to splash. So like you can splash the pieces you're missing in this archetype, and I do think Insidious Roots is worth first picking and building around. Early on in the draft, like during the drafting process, you need to decide how creatures are leaving your graveyard. Like it's always going to be a balance of how creatures are leaving the graveyard versus and how many things you have to let them leave the graveyard. So it's easier and cheaper to collect evidence to exile them from the graveyard. But if you have very powerful late game bombs or cards with strong enter the battlefield effects, then you want raise set effects, cards that leave the graveyard into your hand. There's a sort of divide in the black-green Gravebreak cards between value and size. That is, am I reanimating one huge creature that I dumped there by self-milling, or am I reanimating lots of little creatures in order to make as many plants as possible and going wide? So just try to pay attention to your engines versus your enablers, and if you're missing a piece of this deck, like what you care about is engines, you need to get the engine together. Then you can splash colors pretty easily out of green. It's a very cool set. Hey Temno, how's it going? Up next, we've got blue-black control. So blue-black control is pretty self-explanatory. Your card advantage can come from a few different ways. So if you are and you can split it too. If you're basing your card advantage in blue, it's going to be mostly clues, which means you need to max out on your efficient spells because you're going to have to spend your extra mana sacrificing clues, and you're going to need to find time and mana to sacrifice clues. That means you need to run extra lands. That means you need to use cheaper spells and think about what you're doing each turn. It is not an easy deck to play. And then you can also get card advantage from recursion. We talked about it a little bit for black green, but there's a lot of good ways to pick up multiple creatures and a lot of creatures that do something when they come into play. So decide where your card advantage is coming from. Decide whether you're going to be a tempo deck or just a deck that kills everything and wins in the late game. There are very good ways, like late game combo finish type ways to win. We'll see a few of them today. One of them we saw yesterday was that blue card that if you have no cards in your library is a 10/10 with vigilance, hexproof, and flying. Like this is a format that rewards building a deck that only has a couple win conditions and then just getting there. Figure out how you're going to use your disguises and find your value. Coerce to Kill is a really good example of like, it's going to be a 2-for-1 and it's usually going to deal with real problems. All right, Wisp Drinker Vampire. So black-white weenies is the black-white archetype. It is the easiest to enable out of all the black archetypes. And the payoffs will go late in black but early in white. So the payoffs for black-white weenies in black tend to only work in black-white weenies. They don't do well outside of it. But the payoffs for white weenies in white are good in every aggressive deck. So if you are going to first pick a Wisp Drinker Vampire and you have the choice between a black payoff and a white payoff, you're usually going to want to take the white payoffs. Also, the white creatures tend to be better, whereas the black removal and black enablers tend to be better. Find a way to draw some cards. You don't need a ton, but you do need a way to dig into your deck a little. And you just have to pay attention to that while you're here. You need a little less removal. Like, you need a few removal spells because you need to hit them. But, like, honestly, in the black-white weenie deck, removal is just a later consideration. You'll be able to get more removal, and you don't care about a lot of their creatures. You need to think about which creatures you're killing really carefully. Like, if you have 3 murders in your deck, you don't want to murder everything. You just want to murder the things that attack through you or that you can't block or that generate more value than you can handle. But like this Wisp Drinker Vampire is really good at invalidating a lot of what your opponent is trying to do. All right, so which brings us to the color overview for black. This is black. Yeah, that's black. So this is our last color. This is the last color we're going to cover right now. So compared to other colors, black has the clearest archetypal roles. It is easiest to tell, okay, this card goes into this deck. This card goes into these two decks. You can look at a card and know which decks it goes into. As a result, black has the most medium ratings and medium difficulties. You don't have to compete as much for black cards. Black can weirdly support more drafters than a lot of, so blue supports a lot of drafters at a given table because the cards are pretty good. Black supports a lot of drafters at the given table because you don't want a white weenie card out of black if you're blue-black control, whereas somebody on your left might. So don't be surprised if you're in black and then the person on your left is in black too, and you both have good decks. There are a lot of different avenues for card advantage. Like we talked about that earlier, your card advantage can come from drawing cards, your card advantage can come from killing creatures efficiently, it can come from just picking up cards from your graveyard. But you need to focus to enable those. Like if your card advantage is coming from returning cards from your graveyard to your hand, you're going to need to pick your mill and your surveil a little bit more highly. If your card advantage is coming from drawing cards, you're going to need to find time to crack your clues more efficiently. And if it's coming from little enablers, like there's a few cards we'll see that are like, turn a clue into a removal spell, then you need to make sure you are picking those highly. Think about how each card is going to play over time, and think about how, when will this be good as a disguised creature, and when will this be good just to cast? When will I be able to flip something up and surprise them? And then you're going to want to look for bridges. So in a given archetype, so in pack 1, if you figure out you're early on that, like if you first pick a Wisp Drinker Vampire and then second pick a Wisp Drinker Vampire, and you know your black-white weenies, then you're going to need to pick something that is good in multiple archetypes first, and you're going to need to try and table the card that is only good in your archetype. You also want to be thinking about, like, if you're black but you're not sure what your second color is early on, you need to pick the bridges and then find the places where they intersect. So, questions to ask while you're playing. What do you want to do with the card? Think about it that as you're taking. Are you trying to recur it a bunch? Are you just going to block with it? How are you using your graveyard? Every archetype in black will use its graveyard a little, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. Does this creature require recursion to be good? Just because we were talking about it last, there is a Ravenous Rat style creature in this format. I think that card is not good unless you can pick it up. But then it gets very good. And then, do you really need this removal spell? So in a lot of sets, and I talk about this a lot, removal is very good. Removal is something that you have to first pick. Removal is something that you take very aggressively. Removal in this set is plentiful. There's a lot of it. And all removal spells are a little bit worse because of how many creatures are worth 2 cards. If your opponent plays 3 creatures in a row that all investigate, and then you kill all 3 of them, you're going to lose the game. In other formats, if your opponent plays 3 creatures and you kill 3 creatures, you're going to win. In this set, killing creatures isn't good unless you are already moving towards your win condition. So the simplest version of that is to play a 2-mana creature, then kill your opponent's creature on turn 3, 4, and 5, and you're attacking. You're buying damage with those removal spells. But if you're not attacking, that's not good enough. That's why removal tends to have a slightly lower rating than you'd think. All right, drink. All right, our first card in black is Agency Coroner. So I actually gave this one, I came back and changed it up. Like a 5-mana 3/6 would be bad in a lot of sets. It survives everything. There's no 6 damage spell in this set. There's very few 6 power creatures. 6 toughness is huge. So like, this is a more controlling card. It is a little weird. Like the fact that it cares about suspected creatures is a little bit weird because like you don't really want this in your suspect deck. You want this in your weenies deck or in your decks that are making a lot of bodies. But it does grind a lot of value over time, and it's hard to kill. So like, the stat line feels bad for 5 mana, but it's just so difficult to deal with if your opponent isn't specifically black, and it'll probably get more than 1 card worth of value over time. You are limited on how many of these you can run, and 5 is a contested slot in black. The 5 drops are good, but I will be playing the Coroner occasionally. I do like it. I gave it a 4. That's like playable. If you have a lot, rather than, I know this is an argument against what I just said, but rather than fit into any specific archetype, it fits into things that care about recursion, that care about making their creatures die, and that generate a lot of weenies or small things. Being able to sacrifice a creature on demand is pretty valuable, and you will often already have mana up because of clues. It's a cool card. Allia Assailant. So this is a really cool card. It is deceptively strong. A 3-mana 3/3 that enters the battlefield tapped will often feel like a nightmare because you'll draw it off the top of your library in the late game, and you just won't have a blocker to deal with what your opponent is doing aggressively. However, Allia Assailant has the option, like, you have the option of playing a 3-mana 3/3 tap or a 3-mana 2/2 Disguise. So the Disguise really negates the really negates this drawback. This is not going to feel like a drawback, except specifically when your opponent has a 3-mana Disguise creature. Disguise cost is a little high, but you're going to be playing this face up way more often than a lot of cards. So being in place as a 3-mana 3/3 that doesn't block, or a 3-mana 2/2 that does block, is really nice optionality, and eventually you'll find time to flip it up for 6 mana and drain them 3, and that's not irrelevant. Like, that's pretty good burn, especially in the spec deck. You really care about that direct damage in the late game. Hey Plastic, how you been? We're in the middle of our set review. I am saying hello and answering questions between slides, but if you have any, be sure to let me know. So I gave the Allia Assailant a 5, as nearly always going to play near that ceiling of the 5, but that optionality is pretty valuable here. And I gave it that floor of a 3 or of a 4. I might go ahead and lower that floor because that floor of a 3 is kind of weak in an aggressive deck, but it's a really good late game draw in aggressive deck. It's just awkward because it's 3 mana, and the aggressive decks care a lot about what they're doing on turn 3. So that floor of a 3 is in the most aggressive decks. We might not be as interested in running it. I'm doing great. This set is great. I'm so excited to play with. It's like constantly trying to deduce what your opponent has face down. Like, and this is a really good example of a card that you're going to be constantly trying to deduce. If your opponent is on turn 5 in a black deck and you're like, why haven't they flipped this up yet? It's probably an Allia Assailant. But you're usually going to play this face up if it's your turn 3 play, and face down if it's your turn 5 play. So cool. All right, up next we have Basilica Stalker, another very cool morph card, disguise card. This is one I'm going to be pretty happy to splash in a lot of decks because it is only 1 black to flip face up. And I know the stat line doesn't seem that impressive for 6 mana. It is the kind of thing where you're like, so compared to a lot of disguise cards, this isn't something you want to play for 6 or for 3. You almost always want to play it for 6. But this is one of the ones most likely to get a surprise block. You will probably be able to kill something when you flip this up, because if they're attacking you with a 2/2 flyer, well, now you have a surprise 3/4 flyer. And it's fine to just flip it up and attack on turn 5 and start surveilling. Surveilling is great, and that 1 life isn't nothing. So I gave it a 5. I think it's deceptively strong, even though the stat line looks bad against its costs. But I love Disguise in general, and it's a detective. It has relevant types with relevant life gain and relevant surveilling. Surveilling is very powerful in this set. Yeah, it's surprised Griffin. It's not a prize Griffin, it's a surprise Griffin. There. I like this card. The stat, like 4 toughness, flipping into 4 toughness is an extra boon. You're only saying that because I don't have my drum roll sound effect queued up. All right, Case of the Gorgon's Kiss. This is a very cool card. It's work to enable, but you don't have to go outside of black to enable it. So just as a general scenario, if you attack with 2 creatures and your opponent blocks with 2 creatures, like if your opponent has a 3/3 and a 2/2 and you have a 2/2 and a 2/2 and they block both of them, then Case of the Gorgon's Kiss kills a creature and is a 4/4 with Death Touch and Lifelink. You'll also have situations where you play this on turn 1 and then mill 4. This is work to enable, but there are enough cards that, for instance, surveil when they hit a player or when they attack, that killing 1 creature with it, turning a card that would have been a trade otherwise, will just become a 4/4 Death Touch and Lifelink. This card is easier to turn on than it looks. It's still not free, and we're not interested in either half of it by itself. You really want to be killing a creature and playing a 4/4 with Death Touch and Lifelink. But you can get this turned on turn 4 and cast another spell and cast a disguised creature. You'll be able to attack and sacrifice a creature into their, like, if you attack your 2/2 into their 4/4 and then play Case of the Gorgon's Kiss and a Murder on turn 4, you're happy with this card. Like, this is a solid removal spell and a very cool case. It's also a 1 mana case, which all the cards that care about cases are going to be happy to see. Cool card. That's right, Alex. Great card. So I gave it a floor of 3 with a ceiling of 8. You have to be conscious of this card. You will always be able to turn it on, but it's going to require both careful play and careful drafting. I'm very excited to play with it. All right, Cerebral Confiscation. So like, this is one of the better mind rots we've seen. Your opponent will discard 2 cards, or you get to take a card from it. This card is only worth playing if you both care about the value and the like it's 2 cards, but it's 2 cards that you don't necessarily want to spend the time on. It is more likely to hit in the late game than in other sets because of clues. So I will sometimes play 1, and I'll be very happy to sideboard this. You mostly only want it actively, though, in the blue-black control deck, and it's really hard to find time to play the Cerebral Confiscation. Like, it's hard to find time to play Mind Rot when so many creatures cost 3 mana because of Disguise. But that doesn't mean it's unplayable, it just means it's a little weak. Yeah, I gave it a 3. It's usually going to play near that floor of a 3. Is a lot less. So usually I give Mind Rots a floor of a 2, but they're not that likely to miss in this set. However, they're not that likely to hit your opponent's 2 best cards either. Good chill song. All right, next, Clandestine Meddler. This one's getting a revisit for me. 3 mana for a 3/2 is awkward because it trades with your opponent's disguised creatures. And you have to already have another creature in play to gain the value of the Suspect. I don't know. I don't think you want this outside of the Suspect deck, but surveilling every attack is nice. If it triggered for every attacking suspected creature, it would be a lot better. But if you attack with 4 suspected creatures, it's still a little weak. If it could suspect your opponent's creatures, you'd also be happier with it. But generally, this is just kind of weak. Hey, I got the Absol. Cool. Yeah, like, I'll give it a revisit. It's playable without something I'm happy to be playing. It's good actively in the Suspect deck, and that's why it's got a 4, and playable elsewhere, but I'm probably not playing this outside of the Suspect deck. Extracted Confession. This is a cool one. So 2 mana, your opponent sacrifices a creature is great on turn 2 and on turn 3, and usually really weak after that. So if we look at like Tithing Blade out of LCI, Tithing Blade was a good comparison because it felt amazing whenever you got a real creature with Tithing Blade and then you could transform it later, and then awful when your opponent played a Tinker's Toad and made 2 1/1s. And there are enough things in this format that your opponent will have, will be able to late game sacrifice something that they don't care about, but being able to collect evidence is really nice. So collecting evidence to take out the biggest thing on their board is great, and it also works well with cards like Insidious Roots. So like, this is a card I'm going to be pretty happy to play in general, but I do want to make sure I'm actively putting things into my graveyard. That's more of a way that you play than a conscious decision while you're drafting. It's a very cool card that I'll usually play a few copies of, but it can be awkward in the wrong deck. This one is I'm not going to take it over like a Murder. I might take it over a Murder because it's only 2 mana, and you want to care about collecting evidence. I'm going to drop this to a 4 because like, you can't run this in a deck that doesn't care about collecting evidence, but it's really good otherwise. It also answers things. So if you're a control deck, you need to make sure you can answer some of the unanswerable things. The unanswerable things are a 1/1 indestructible and a 10/10 hexproof flyer. And Extracted Confession does let you deal with those. Hi, Sandy. Sorry, I'm only doing stuff between slides. Hydrate. All right. So it's not that collecting evidence is difficult, Kaiser. Is that you don't want it's not that collecting evidence here is difficult. It's that if you care about collecting evidence, this card is worth 2 cards. So I'm not saying you have to be able to collect evidence for this card to be good. I'm saying you have to make a plant for this card to be good. It's not that hard to make a plant. But like if you have, like I'll splash this card in the when you collect evidence, make a clue. When you collect evidence, make a thopter. That's what you need for extracted confession. But then it's really good. Yeah, but that's why that ceiling is a 6. All right, up next we have Fester Leech. This is the best 1-drop in this set. I don't think that is that close. And this is just a great card in black. The threat of activation is more valuable here than the activation itself. Milling 2 cards when you hit a player is good. Like, that's something you want. You want to collect evidence, you want cards in your graveyard, you can turn that into fresh cards. It's usually going to play near that ceiling of a 6 because you only need a few cards in your deck that care about you milling cards to get the value out of this. And a 3/3 is really good. Like, this is a 1-drop that your opponent's face down disguise creatures cannot block. Yeah, no, this is a very powerful card. I gave it a ceiling of a 6, but the rating's a 6 because it's almost always going to play at that ceiling. And you do want to care about your graveyard, but like it aids in collecting evidence. It aids in having things in your graveyard to return. It's pretty cool. Yeah, Plastic, it's fun. I'm very excited to collect some evidence. All right, next we've got It Doesn't Add Up. So you cannot reanimate a creature at instant speed to block. You can reanimate a creature at instant speed to attack on your turn. So end step, bringing back a creature and then attacking with it while it has a menace is going to win you the game. This is the other side of that exiling from your graveyard. So this is the other side of that grave break. So you can grave break by collecting evidence and exiling, or you can grave break by returning 1 big creature. You kind of have to weigh them. If you're collecting a lot of evidence, you might not be able to make things add up. Which is a good name for this card. I like this. I like this flavor text. Like, they didn't kill Teza because they would have told us. Yeah, but so this is good. You do want a few things to bring back with it. You want whatever you bring back to be worth bringing back, which is why it's got a little bit of effort involved. And being instant speed is solid. Like, you will often be holding up mana for other things, for murder. Like, you're gonna have situations where you have It Doesn't Add Up and then a murder in your hand, and if you play this card, then great, and your other option will be to murder something and crack a clue. And it's good, efficient use of mana. But you have to work to enable it a little bit, and you can enable it within black. All right, up next, Lead Pipe. So this is another one of the clue equipments that I really like. It's usually going to play near that ceiling of a 4. It turns all of your creatures into threats. It is itself a clue. And if you are suspecting creatures, I'm bumping up that ceiling to a 5. Because if you're suspecting creatures actively, this card becomes fantastic. A 1/1 suspected creature is fine. Like, a 1 with menace is fine. A 3/1 with menace that your opponent really might have to give up 2 creatures to block and they lose a life when they block it is way better. Nah, sorry, I have that stuff disabled, Plastic, just for the set review. This is the only stuff that I make for the purposes of recording. Yeah, I like this card a lot. I think it's pretty strong in the right deck. It's just... maybe I bumped this up to a 5. Like, I'll take Lead Pipe over It Doesn't Add Up, pack 1, pick 1. I'm bumping Lead Pipe up to a 5. No, because it's not good in every black deck. It's only good in the aggressive black decks and the clue black deck. It is cool that it's good. Like, this is good in red black and blue black, but it's kind of weak in black green, and it's kind of weak in black white. It's solid in black white. It's good in 3 of the 4 decks. Okay, I talked myself up to a 5. All right, this is my pick for best black uncommon. It's really good. It works. There's actually 2. I have 2 picks for best black uncommon. But this is up there. 2 mana, 1/3 flying. Great. A 2 mana. It's got value if you discard it to draw a card. It's got value if you mill it and pick it up. It leaves its graveyard on its own, and it triggers your cards that care about power 2 or less 3 times by itself. Very powerful. It blocks everything at 2 mana or 3 mana. Really good. Um, makes it does make tap bats, but you can do it at instant speed. So like you can hold up the ability to crack 2 clues and then mill this otherwise, and you'll be happy every time you get to surveil this into your graveyard. Just a lot of value in one card, and always flying. I don't know Delny. What is Delny? Streetwise Lookout. Creatures you control with power 2 or less. Can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. An ability to creature you control with power 2 or less triggers. No, this is an activated ability, unfortunately. You have to activate it. Cool. I haven't seen all the rares and mythics yet, which is why some ratings I put revisit on. Item next, Long Goodbye. Cards like solid removal. I almost want to drop it down, but it kills a lot. It kills more than half the creatures in this set, and it hits things with Deceive. I'm giving this a revisit, because this might actually come down. I don't even know how interested I am in splashing it, but it kills enough that I'm going to be happy playing it in any given black deck. Alright, there's not a ton to say about it. Macabre Reconstruction. Fantastic if you care about bringing things back in the graveyard. If you care about things leaving the graveyard, or if you have a few specific cards it combos with, it's quite good, but it is work. So like, if you pay 4 mana for this, you're not too happy, but if you pay 2 mana for this, it's fantastic, and it's surprisingly easy to enable. It does have, like, you can't run too many copies of this card. I'll almost always play the first one, and I'll play the second and third one in green-black, some blue-black decks, and we're about to look at a few cards that I'm very interested in recurring. So, like, you have to weigh this against the other things you're doing and against the specific cards that you're picking up. But there's enough self-mill and surveil that I'm going to put work into doing it. Because, like, if you attack with a suspected creature here and surveil a creature into your graveyard, then it's only 2 mana. Like, this is a good source of card advantage, but it's kind of alternative to the clues, so you got to pay attention. It affects ward cards, yes. So this is specifically... So I actually just learned this. So Fizzle, a spell fizzling no longer counters it. So under old rules, your opponent could flip up a morph creature and this would still kill it. But under new rules, the spell just fails to resolve. So if your opponent, so it does target deceive creatures. It goes right through the ward trigger. Oh, this includes the ward ability. Cool. But if they flip up a disguise creature and it has 4 mana value, then it does not work. Up next, we have Murder. In any other set, this card would be a lot better, but like, you can't splash it. Being instant, like, it's still good. You still play it in black decks, but it has diminishing returns. Like, I'm not always going to take, I will take a Leering Onlooker over Murder most of the time in this set. Because, like, let's say your opponent is on the Leering Onlooker plan. Murder looks really bad. Murder kills 1/3 of this card for 3 mana. There are just so many cards that, like, you don't want to murder a Fester Leech. That costs, you don't want to murder your opponent's 1-drop. You don't want to murder a Clandestine Meddler that's already surveilled twice and given evasion to a creature. You don't want to murder a Gorgon's Kiss that has already killed a creature. You do want to murder a Basilica Stalker, but it feels really bad to murder an Alley Assailant after it's drained you 3, or an Agency Coroner that's already drawn 3 cards. Like, we haven't looked at it, we've only looked at 1 creature this color that you are happy to murder. Yeah, like, it's still a card you want to play, it's still a card you need to play, but what you need to do with Murder is look at that instant speed. You want to try and get 2 cards out of your Murder. You want to try and do it in response to their spell. And you do need this removal. Like, you have to run a certain amount of removal, but like, in a set, like, look at the cards we've seen so far. We've looked at Long Goodbye, we've looked at Extract a Confession. Oh, we haven't looked at -X yet. Like, there is so much excellent removal in this set, and there are so many creatures that are worth multiple cards that you have to weigh your removal against everything else you're doing. I do think blue-black control can max out on removal spells. Like, blue-black control wants 9-10 removal spells pretty happily, but everybody else, you want your removal to do other things if you can help it. Look at Neon Dynasty as an example. All right. Night Drinker Moroi. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I don't want my 4-drops to die to a shock, especially if I already lost 3 life on them. However, a 4/2 flyer is a beater. It is really good at hitting your opponent. So like, and flipping up for black is nice. The thing is, flipping this up for black does not let you, it doesn't let you trade with, it doesn't let you win a combat you were going to lose. It does let you trade with a combat you weren't going to trade. So like the card is still solid because you have options on the cost. This is either a 3 mana 2/2 with Ward 2, a 4 mana 4/2 that you lose 3 life, or a 5 mana 4/2 that you don't. So the optionality makes it solid still. I'm bumping the floor up to a 3 because of that optionality. But I'm still not going to take it that high if I'm very aggressive and I want flyers, or if I have a lot of removal. And I know this doesn't seem related, but a 4/2 flyer that in a deck where you're consistently taking out their 2 toughness blockers does not give them time to crack the clues that their blockers are generating. So it ends up being a solid tempo creature. It's all like, it's playable, but it's not quite as good as it's been in other sets. Yeah. Actually, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Murder costing 5 a good chunk at a time, again in 3 or 4 cards. Persuasive Interrogators. This is the blue-black. So blue-black control has 2 incredibly powerful late-game finishers. Your floor on this card is a 6 mana 5/6 that draws a card that investigates. That's really good. This second ability does nothing unless you're sacrificing 5 clues. However, in a late game situation, you can play this at 6 mana. Let's say if you know you have this card, you start saving up your clues. You play a Persuasive Interrogator, you crack it, and then on turn 8, let's say, you play Persuasive Interrogator, crack a clue, untap, crack 4 clues. You just won the game. This is a really good finisher. You do kind of want it to be a finisher, but it's not the end of the world if it's just a 6 mana 5/6 blocker that investigates. It is also a detective, which is pretty nice. I guess it only really fits into blue-black control. Like, it's only really good. I'm lowering the score. 4 floor and a 5. Because you care about this the most in blue-black control, and everyone else is just happy to have it, but they're not going to pick it that high. So like, I'm keeping it at a 5. I think I'm comfortable with it at a 5. And then if I'm a blue-black control deck, I will first pick this because I really want this as a finisher. It also stacks. Like, 2 copies of this mean you only need 3 clues to kill your opponent. 3 copies of this mean you only need 2 clues to kill your opponent. I wonder if there's any clones in the set. I haven't looked at all the rares yet. I know there's not a common or uncommon though. All right, Polygraph Orb. This is a good card in the control deck because it draws a lot of cards and grinds the game out, and it's a good card in green-black, but you don't want it elsewhere. So I gave it a 4 with that floor of a 2. It does draw you 2 cards, but it also loses you 2 life. So like this is not a set where you need to fight for card advantage. However, this is a set where you need to fight for the ability to put 2 cards into your graveyard, and you need to fight for the ability to repeatedly collect evidence. So like, you only want this card. I mean, blue-black has better ways to get card advantage, but you'll play it if you're short on it. Black-green wants this card quite badly. It's really good being able to collect evidence multiple times and putting 2 cards in your graveyard. All right, Presumed Dead. This one's getting a revisit. This one might be kind of bad. The thing about revisit, compared to other sets where we've had this effect, like Not Dead After All or Fake Your Own Death, this set has fewer Enter the Battlefield abilities. That's true. It is instant speed discard. You don't get to choose it. They get to choose it. They can always pay the 3 life, but still, doing it on their draw step is going to be fun. So the Enter the Battlefield effects are weaker because of how many of them are actually disguise triggers. However, if you Presumed Dead your face down giant disguise creature, it comes back face up. So this is a solid way to trade up one of your disguise creatures and flip it up. This is also a set without a lot of protective instants. Like, there's not a lot of good ways to keep your creature alive. So, variable. We're going to, I looked at as many examples as I could, and I found lots of good ones, lots of bad ones, and lots of ways that it is better and worse than this effect in the past. So we're going to have to play with it a bit. This is the first one that I I don't know. This is the first one that I really have to play with before I have an idea. But I'm happy giving it a 4 for now with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 5. It's a cool card, and I'm really excited to like pick up a huge disguise creature with it and flip it. Like picking up like in a black red deck, if you have the Rift Hellion, that's a 6/7. Being able to attack your 2/2 into their 4/2 or into their 4/4, and then have it come back as a 6/7 is awesome. But suspecting it can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. Like you lose the blocker, but it gains menace. So like you want it to be in a more aggressive deck. There's just a lot of things attached to this. It'll be fun. Repeat Offender. So you aren't as punished as usual for having your 2-drop have 1 toughness. There's not a lot of good ways to ping, and there's not a lot of good 1/1s. There are some good 3/3s, but in a pinch, like if your opponent plays a 2/2 on their turn 3, you just attack and you trade it and you're fine with that. If your opponent plays a 1/3, then you go ahead and suspect it. And that first suspect is pretty important because then you get to use a threat of activation for the rest of the game. But it is a lot of mana. So like, I don't mind a mana sink in my black-red deck that cares about suspecting things. Because that deck is not great at making clues. Like it's always going to be strong and reasonable, and it's never going to be amazing. Rot Farm Mortipede. Now this is a card that if you can trigger it, like a 4/4 with Menace and Lifelink is a game-ending threat. It stabilizes you, your opponent has to deal with it or they're going to lose. Really cool card. If you cannot trigger it, you cannot play this card. I'm lowering the floor to a 2. You really want this to be... You need multiple ways to trigger this in your deck. Ideally, you want to be triggering it every turn, but like if you're comboing with a Polygraph Orb, it's very good. You can collect evidence every turn to do the thing, and then you get Menace and Lifelink, and this card says you're stable now. Like 4/4 Lifelink is so big. Cool card, specifically for black-green. This is another one of those cards where it's like, it's very clear which archetype this is for. In the other colors, they don't have that kind of clarity of archetype. There's a lot of 4s and 5s. Up next, we've got Slice from the Shadows. I'm going to go ahead and... I almost want to bump this up to a 6. Like, I will be taking this card over Murder most of the time. And it can't be countered by Ward. So, like, it kills a Ward creature for this... It kills a disguised Ward creature for the same cost. I'm bumping this up to a 6. I talked myself up on this. So, like... Because I will splash this card, I'm willing to play this card as a few of these cards as a black card where I can't splash a Murder. I'm not going to want to splash it. Like, I'll take it at a 4 if I don't have other removal. But I do think this card is better than Murder in this set. Yeah, I like it. Slice from Shadows is cool. All right, up next, Slimy Dual Leech. Great in the white weenie, in black-white weenies, bad everywhere else. It is nice attacking as a 3/4 Death Touch, but you don't really need it to be a 3/4 Death Touch. It's really good if you have a lot of suspected creatures. Giving a creature with Death Touch, with Suspect Death Touch is incredibly useful. Like, it gets to kill so many of your creatures, but doing it not at instant speed hurts a bit. Like, the fact that this only gives your Menace creatures Death Touch at sorcery speed means that they won't really be able to block it very often. And it's just not a great stat line. Otherwise, if you aren't triggering this on other creatures that you care about, then don't play it. Snarling Gorehound. This one, it's weird because it has Menace, but so many other things already have Menace. You have to, like, this is a bridge card between the white weenie deck and the Surveil deck and the black-green. This is a bridge between black-white and black-green. You don't want it in black-red because you are already great at giving things Menace, and you don't want it in blue-black because this is not a controlling card, but like it'll punch in for a few points of damage and it will Surveil, and Surveil is a valuable thing in this. All right, up next, tied for best uncommon is Soul Enervation. 4 mana to give a creature -4/-4 at instant speed is just good. Like, and then it leaves something behind. You want to be triggering it a lot. Like, black is very good at triggering this a lot. Draining each opponent 1 every time a card leaves the graveyard is really good. And it stacks up fast. Like, if these cards stacks really fast. I like this card. This is the kind of removal you want in this format. You want removal that leaves something useful behind. This might be the best common in the set. It is unassuming. It is better than Murder. You have to work a little to make it better than Murder, but I do find this card better than Murder. And that is because of the rest of the set. So, in this set, a lot of the creatures have menace. Pretty much all of them. If your 2/2 menace creature gets blocked by two 2/2s, Toxin Analysis kills both of them, gains you 2 life, and draws you a card. In addition to that, so many creatures have weird stat lines that you get to work for. So like blue-black, if they attack their 2/2 into your Fairy Snoop, you flip up your Fairy Snoop, draw a card, give it Death Touch and Lifelink, draw a card. Death Touch is incredibly valuable in this set. There are only a few creatures that have it. There are only a few ways to gain it. This is the only way to gain it at instant speed, and it's 1 mana. Like, this will so often... It's going to feel like Suit Up from Neon Dynasty. Like, you do have to trade your creature off often, but often you will trade your creature off for 2 creatures because it's suspected and has menace. Often you will trade your creature off for nothing because it's a 1/4 or a 1/3. The stat lines in this set add up very strangely, and the existence of Toxin Analysis means you don't get to attack your 2/2 for free into your opponent's 1/3, and there's a lot of 1/3s in this set. There's a lot of big butts in this set. There's a lot of good ways to block. There's a lot of ways to turn your disguised creature into a better creature. And the fail case for Toxin Analysis is you gain life, you trade your creatures, and you draw a card, which means that your bad trade becomes a trade. This card is way better than it looks. And I'll be taking it over in most traditional removal. Hey, Troy, good to see you. Sorry, I'm only answering things between slides. What are you up to tonight? All right, 2 cards left. Up next, we've got Undercity Eliminator. This is tied for best uncommon in the set. It does get better the more recursion you have. It's pretty easy to sack a creature to exile, not destroy. Exile a creature. This is the kind of removal you really want out of black, especially with all the good ways to recur it, especially with ways to recur it at instant speed. Very powerful, take it high. It's a reason to be black. Troy! I feel you, man. We'll talk. Congratulations, though. Wait, but that's not when your birthday is. Maybe it is. Let me go check. I feel you, though. It's a weird time. It's always weirder the day before, though. It is when your birthday. Congratulations. We'll talk tomorrow. I'm off tomorrow, so I'll be sure to hang out, okay? Especially if you're streaming. All right, our last black card for the night is Unscrupulous Agent. They do exile the card. We saw this effect in the last set. It is more likely to make them exile a card because of how clues work, but you still want to be able to recur it. I wouldn't play this card if I can't recur it, if I can't play it again. Okay, everybody. I'm sorry to end so abruptly. Normally I would stream something else afterwards, but I do have to go because I have a meeting that I am late for. Happy birthday, Troy. I'll be sure to wish it to you again tomorrow. So I have a meeting that I am very late for. We're going to go ahead and... Well, let's go see Asparagus. I haven't seen... Oh, never mind. We're going to go see Walker Sunrise because he is having his 3rd anniversary.
Where dust returns to dust.
So that's going to be it for tonight. Tomorrow, I don't have a stream scheduled, but I will do one if I can. So the thing I am doing is I am writing a primer. I'm writing a pre-release primer. It's going to be what you need. Pre-release primer in time for your pre-release. I'm writing a draft primer in time for your pre-release. And if I can get that done in time, then I will have a stream tomorrow. But I don't have anything scheduled because I'm not positive that, like, I got to check out some things. We're gonna go see Walker Sunrise. He's one of the very first streamers I ever watched. He's one of the reasons that I started streaming, and is his 3rd anniversary. So show him some love. I'd really appreciate it. I will see everybody when I see you. I will make a note as soon as I have one. Good night.